Alrighty, guys, the Sony Spider-Man saga post Kraven the Hunter never ceases to amaze me because, so we talked about a couple times here, right? So there was an article that came out a while ago that said the Sony universe might be dead. In that article, as we covered it, they talked about the fact that they might stop making these movies in the same general continuity of Kraven the Hunter and Morbius and Madam Web and Venom, even though, yes, they weren't technically connected in any specific way. And to be fair, in that article we talked about the fact that they weren't just going to stop making Spider-Man movies and going to sell the rights over to Marvel, nothing like that, but they were going to, maybe stop making the movies in the vein of the same universe and maybe just focus on Spider-Man 4, Beyond the Spider-Verse, and Spider-Man Noir, and then just focus on other individual projects. But then another article kind of came out to just clarify all that stuff that was going on and talked about the fact that, well, yes, we want to clarify that Sony is not just going to stop making these movies, they're just going to rethink their approach and how they're going to do it, because there was an acknowledgement there that there was a lot of failure on their part. Okay, great. Yes, you've made, maybe, in my opinion, you made 1.5 good movies, in my opinion at least, in the Sony Spider-Man universe, that being Venom 1, and most of Venom 2 I think was fine. Venom 2 was okay. The rest of them, I admittedly haven't seen a couple of them, so I can't be the one to judge them based on their qualities, but the critics and audiences have panned a lot of those films. So yeah, it makes total sense. Let's rethink things. Let's take a step back and let's see what else we can do. Well, the CEO of Sony, who is leaving now, and we'll talk about why that's probably a good thing, has come out in recent days and basically addressed the fact that this whole debacle here with the Sony Spider-Man universe is not actually their fault. It's actually the critics' fault. Now, this is so mind-boggling and so fascinating to listen to, and I just want to read out the quotes here, and then we'll talk about it on the other side, because this is just so fascinating that people that any individuals can even think this way, in a position of leadership as this guy is. So this is the CEO, the former CEO. Let me look at I believe his name is Tom. I'm going to mispronounce his last name. Vinciquerra. I totally butchered that last name, but I believe that he was the CEO, and he is going to be now replaced by the current COO of Sony, Ravi Ahuja, who is going to take his place. So thankfully, this guy is no longer making the chief decisions at Sony, because listen to what he has to say about the failures of the Sony Spider-Man universe. So he says, quote, "We've had mostly very, very good results. Unfortunately, Kraven the Hunter that we launched last weekend," this quote came from a couple weeks ago, "and my last film launch is probably the worst launch we've had in the 7.5 years, in the 7.5 years that he was there. So that didn't work out very well," which I still don't understand, because the film is not a bad film. He added that we've been successful. And then I'm reading directly from a CBR article, comic book reader article here. And he continues on and goes on to say about Madam Web, quote, "Let's just touch on Madam Web for a moment. Madam Web underperformed in the theaters because the press just crucified it. It was not a bad film, and it did great on Netflix." Okay, I'm not going to comment on that for the time being. He then continues, quote, "For some reason, the press decided that they didn't want us making these films out of Kraven and Madam Web, and the critics just destroyed them. They also did it with Venom, but the audience loved Venom and made Venom a massive hit. These are not terrible films. They were just destroyed by the critics and the press for some reason." He then goes on to say, quote, "I do think we need to rethink it just because it's snake bitten. If we put another one out, it's going to get destroyed no matter how good or bad it is," end quote. Okay, these are the quotes. This is what the CEO, the former CEO of the Sony Pictures division, I believe, or Sony in general, I don't know, but Sony, one of the higher ups at Sony, this is what he recently said about their Sony Spider-Man universe. Is he out of his mind? I don't know. Maybe. Is he self-isolated, self-absorbed, and in his own little bubble? Because frankly, these comments are baffling. This is, and I was listening to the John Campea show the other day, and they talked about the fact that this is one of the greatest corporate gaslightings I've ever seen, and I totally agree with that, because listen to this. He's saying that these films did bad because, and I use this word very intentionally and very carefully here. I am not somebody who likes to use the word agenda at all, because people honestly, most people who write in the comments or who make discussions about agendas in movies and agendas with critics and whatever are almost always, they have an agenda of their own. And I don't want to get into that here. But this is the Sony CEO saying that the critics had an agenda to destroy the Sony universe. this is one of the most backwards thinking kinds of quotes, kinds of lines of logic here that I've ever heard an executive say. Because, like I said before, in the last quote, I had my own disagreements, and if you listen to the clip from a couple weeks ago where one of the exhibitor analysts said something like, well, if they made it's because Spider-Man wasn't in these films that they did so poorly or whatever. And I miss, I'm being a little facetious here just to make a point here, but that guy was like, hey, look, it's because Spider-Man wasn't in these films that these films didn't do as well. That's a total mischaracterization in my opinion. It's not because Spider-Man wasn't in those movies that they didn't do well. It's because those movies weren't good in the first place. And the Sony CEO taking that a step further and saying, oh, it's because the critics had an agenda that this is why the films didn't do so well, is complete and utter nonsense. It is crazy to think whether or not he actually believes this or he's just saying this to try to save face, but that backfired because everybody is online now saying that this is one of the most crazy things you could ever say. And he's out here saying, no, the critics had an agenda. They just want to destroy these films because they don't like us making them. And the fact that he's saying, yeah, we put out another one, it's going to get destroyed. No, if you put out another Sony Spider-Man film, it doesn't matter that Madam Web is terrible. It doesn't matter that Morbius is terrible or Kraven the Hunter is terrible. If you put out another Spider-Man character, let's just say, for example, and I haven't seen the film, so I know Chameleon is in Kraven the Hunter, but let's just say, unrelated to that, they make a Chameleon film, right? Or let's just say they make a Scorpion film. Whatever. Any Spider-Man film. They make a Scorpion film. And it is just the best movie they've ever made. It's a best picture contender. Leonardo DiCaprio is Scorpion and he wins an Oscar for it. No. Critics are going to love that film. They're not going to just, blindly be like, well, because Sony made it, I'm not going to like it. No, that film is going to get the love and praise it deserves no matter what. Now, box office wise is a different question, right? Because, at a certain point, right, even in 2023, when the DCEU was dying, if the DCEU put out that kind of film, it would be critically praised, but the audience might not be willing to accept it as much, and so the movie wouldn't make as much money, but then it builds on that, right? It continues to build on that. You make better and better movies, and they make more and more money, right? It's just the way it goes. So no, it's crazy. I'm glad that this CEO is stepping down because honestly, if this is the line of thinking that was going on at Sony at the time, I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say at all because this is just crazy. Guys, what do you think about these quotes? That the Sony CEO says it is the critics' fault that the Sony universe is failing and the reason that they're not going to put out any more of these kinds of movies for a little bit. I think it is just absolutely crazy that the CEO is saying these things, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this in the comments down below.